Today, I'm speaking with Phyllis Barkman Ferrell. She's an innovator, an investor, and an incubator for brain health and longevity. Phyllis spent 3 decades as a life sciences executive at Eli Lilly, where she eventually led the late stage Alzheimer's therapeutic and diagnostic pipeline. In 2020, she was placed as an executive on loan to the World Economic Forum Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative, where she became the visionary behind the healthcare system preparedness program. She holds a doctor PH from Indiana University and an MBA from Stanford. She has since left Lilly to build PB Farrell, working with investors and organizations to transform health systems around Alzheimer's and longevity. She is also managing director of the Clinical Trial Recruiting Lab at USC Schaefer Center. What I'm interested in today isn't the science. It's what it feels like to carry a mission this personal through the complexity of a 30-year institutional career and then leave it to build something new. So that's what in the inquiry is built for. Phyllis, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Terry.
So before I ask the first question, the format here is simple. I ask, you talk, no right answers, take whatever time you need. So ready?
I'm ready. Let's go.
Excellent. So this one touched me, Phyllis. Um, you've described your personal motivation in a very specific way, making sure other boys don't grow up without the grandfather's presence the way your sons did. I want to start there. How much of every decision you've made in the past 15 years has been shaped by that?
Well, 15 years is about the right number. When I was asked to take the Alzheimer's leadership role at Lilly, it was late 2011. And about 6 months after that, my dad was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And we didn't have any of that in our family previously. I didn't know anything about it. When I had taken the role, it was just taking a job. Lilly moves you around, and they had a leadership role that they thought I could be helpful with, and I moved into it. And then I realized that there was a greater force at work. And I then lived he passed away late 2017. So about 6 years later, um, I lived a personal and professional journey and realized that the patients we were trying to serve on the team were my family and other families like mine. And so pretty much every decision from a career perspective and personal perspective started differently in that moment. A lot of us, I think, have gone through that moment where all of a sudden your parents become, the relationship changes as your parents age. It's a very difficult thing. And for me, with my daddy, it was extremely difficult because he had been a big part of my influence to go get an MBA and have a business career. My dad was a business executive. He was also a commander in the Navy. I was his firstborn son. He had two girls. And so he had shaped so much of my career to that moment that at that point things shifted and I realized it was my job to care for him, to make sure my mom was going to be okay. My sister did most of the caregiving. She was nearby. And then all of a sudden realized that I wasn't moving fast enough for him. But we had to move fast enough for for my generation so that my kids didn't have to care for me the way that my mom cared for my dad, we cared for my parents, but also that this disease didn't come get my kids. And so I can't tell you that there's a decision that I've made in this last chapter that wasn't about making this situation different,
Mm,
not just for my kids, but for other kids like my kids.
yeah, got it. So, Phyllis, when you look at the late stage Alzheimer's pipeline at Lilly in 2011, I think it was, that feels like a significant turning point. Was that a decision you sought out or one that found you?
Oh, it found me. I didn't seek it. In the pharmaceutical industry, at least in big pharma, as drugs move through the pipeline, when they get to that late stage of development, you can put different types of leaders. Obviously, my Dr. PH is very recent, and I had a business background, and yet they put me in the medical team to lead the Alzheimer's team, and that's not super unusual. Once again, as you're starting to get to that last phase of development, go to market, launch preparedness, it's not unusual to have someone that's in a business degree. But I didn't have, I mean, I had neuroscience background. I had launched Cymbalta and I'd worked in psychiatry, but I didn't have any Alzheimer's background. Um, so, that was, like I said, it was a job until that moment that my dad was diagnosed. And then I had this amazing group of people around us. James Keach actually did a movie about our team.
Hmm.
And I just had this incredible group of people around us, both inside Lilly, the Alzheimer's team at Lilly at that point, but also this cohesive and very collaborative community of scientists that we all, worked in the same in field. And all of a sudden it was really transformative. And the science, I mean, Terry, I wish I could tell you how different the science is in 2026 versus where it was in 2011 and 2012. I mean, the amount of scientific innovation and progress we've made is mind-blowing. And it's just a really, really exciting time for the field.
Yeah, absolutely. So, carrying something this personal inside a 30-year institutional career, what does that cost? What does it require you to do differently than a leader who's operating from a purely professional motivation?
It's pretty different. I mean, it's pretty different. People would say, at Lilly, you rotate every 3 years or so, especially on the business side. They say you're vice president potential, and then they, move you through a series of experiences to make sure that you have the experiences and development you need to take on those higher level roles. And so people would say to me, you've been there now 3 years, time to move, right? You've been there now 4 years, time to move, right? You've been there now. And I'd be like, not moving, not moving, not moving. And, what was really amazing is the team around me was the same way. I mean, there's something about working in Alzheimer's disease, at least for me and for that kind of core group that we had back then. Um, Once it gets under your skin, it was people didn't move. I mean, I had people passing up promotions to stay on the Alzheimer's team, and it's really impactful. It's really meaningful. It's hard work, but it's a labor of love and passion. And once again, we were making all this scientific progress. So for people that's motivating for, they stayed. And yeah, it's very different. I've seen a few people since that, for example, moved right after Kisunla was launched. And I just shook my head. I mean, I don't understand. You couldn't have torn me away
Mm.
from getting ready to launch solanezumab if that study had hit. Like it was, there's no way I would have left that role. So I think there's a personal piece to that too. But there's a lot of folks on that team still at Lilly that are we were working together on this in 2011. We would measure progress by, was I pregnant? How old was my kid at that time? And we went through a lot of life changes together as well. The team was incredibly supportive when I lost my daddy, but yeah, it's very different than your traditional, let's rotate every 3 years.
Were there moments inside Lilly where the institution's priorities and your personal mission pulled in different directions? And how did you navigate that without losing either?
Um, oh, I don't know that I navigated it very well. Yeah, there was a time when donanemab had rolled back upstream. Solanezumab missed its primary endpoint in the Expedition program, and the BACE inhibitors, which were kind of the next mechanism, they were halted, and the drug that's available now, Kisunla, rolled back upstream, and the company looked at me and said, well, we don't have anything ready to launch. We don't need a vice president in this role. And I was like, okay, so it's not a vice president job anymore. Make it a different job. And was really, really lucky that the company worked with me on that. So they put me in responsible for external engagement for the whole pipeline. And so that allowed me to reach back upstream into some of the earlier phase molecules. And then they put me on loan on secondment to the World Economic Forum. And that was really transformational because well, it was just a really different type of job. But the company said, we see that you have value here that you can add to the field. Um, I didn't want to go work in a different therapeutic area, and we found something that worked for both. And I think it's actually turned out to be not just transformational for me, but I think it's transformational for the field. And Lilly was quite visionary in that.
Yeah, so just picking up on that, so in 2020, you were placed as executive on loan to the World Economic Forum, Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative. So, what was that decision like from the inside? What did it feel like to step outside the structure you'd operated in for nearly 3 decades?
So Lilly had done this executive on loan before as part of the United Way relationship that Lilly has with the state of Indiana, and they would basically take someone that was on that VP trajectory and they'd rotate them out to work for a year at the United Way, and it was obviously very mutually beneficial. So we had a little bit of a model for that. So when George Vredenberg, who had been working with the World Economic Forum to create this new global health initiative that's kind of modeled off of Gavi and CEPI, called Lilly and said, "We'd like you to fund this." Lilly said, "Okay, we'll provide some seed funding." So that's the other thing, but we want that seed funding to be overseen by one of our people. So it ended up being a strategic decision for Lilly as well. If they were going to put those kind of dollars into creating a new institution, they said, we want someone who really understands the space and is going to make sure that those dollars are stewarded well. So that's how it came about. It didn't start as a full-time role. It started part-time. And then basically, as the program grew, the job got bigger and bigger and bigger. And we can talk about what happened there and what that transition looked like then later. But it was so much fun because it was literally me and a blank sheet of paper. Um, and I had a part-time consultant that worked alongside George Vredenberg that kind of helped me. It was the middle of COVID, which actually helped a lot because the first thing we had to do was figure out what it was. And so we could convene this multi-sector, geographically disparate group because nobody was traveling. So it was actually quite a bit easier to schedule meetings, Zoom meetings, because nobody was, conflicted with travel. And I remember when we were launching it, we were ready to do a press release. And I was like, I guess I'm writing a press release. I'd never written a press release before. I was used to having comms teams. And I didn't have anybody to go give those things to. So I got this amazing ability to be an entrepreneur sitting with a Lilly paycheck, right?
Mm.
Which most entrepreneurs don't get, right? They're kind of bootstrapping or something along those lines. I had the Lilly paycheck, I had the Lilly seed funding to the program, but then I got to really build something without all the governance and the constructs that I was used to after, almost 30 years in a big corporation.
So you became the visionary behind healthcare system preparedness program, which is a global multi-stakeholder initiative, I guess.
Yeah.
How do you lead something that ambitious when the stakeholders are sovereign organizations with their own definitions of success?
Terry, I would say you just do it. You just lead it. And one thing that's different maybe about me, or I've been told that it's different about me, is I'm just going to do it the same way, whether I'm working within the organization, outside of the organization, if I'm interfacing with government. David Cameron has been, the former Prime Minister of the UK, has been a wonderful supporter of ours because he launched the Global Action Against Dementia when he had the G8 presidency in 2013. And I'll tell you, you don't get a different Phyllis if you're former Prime Minister Cameron or if you're, you know, the after hours janitor, you know? I mean, it's the same. And I think when you're going into something like this that's multi-sector, the mission is so clear and it's so powerful. And if you lead with that, then I don't know that you have to do anything different because people recognize I wasn't there with a Phyllis agenda. I was there with a patient and science agenda. And we had to get people aligned around what it was. That's tricky, right? What does good look like? What are the metrics going to be? What's the work plan going to be? What's the funding model? But those are all just basic building blocks of any initiative. When you come in with a very clear mission and you're the same with everybody you talk to, and you don't have a hidden agenda, I don't actually know that it was all that difficult.
Let me just pick up on that, Phyllis. So when you're trying to align health systems across different countries, different,
That's a different issue.
institutional priorities, where does the vision get distorted? I mean, how do you keep the signal intact as it travels through that many layers?
Yeah, so I don't think the vision changes, right? And certainly what we do, right? The DAC role, the DAC mission is to take clinically ready innovation and get it to patients faster. So, we know that it takes 17 to 20 years for a new innovation to make it into standard of care.
Mm,
That's just completely unacceptable. And that's the case no matter which therapeutic area you're in. But in something like Alzheimer's disease, where we have a growing aging population, this is a progressive neuropathological disease, time is brain.
mm.
Every minute matters. We can't wait 17 to 20 years for this to happen. So the mission is this is clinically ready. This is through a regulatory pathway. No more scientific validation. What are all the blocking barriers that are preventing this from getting to a patient and getting, out of a regulatory and into a standard of care? And so that mission doesn't have to change at all. What changes is the how it happens because healthcare is incredibly contextual locally. So, what barriers you face in the US, where we have obviously a very fragmented, vertically integrated system, even with Medicare, because you have commercial payers that adjudicate Medicare fee for service and Medicare Advantage. That's a very, very different model than, say, a UK's NHS system,
Mm.
or even in Brazil. One of our first programs was in Brazil. And I think everybody in the US thought, oh, we're going to be so much better because we're the US. Brazil ran circles around our US health systems in that first program. And that's because they had a single payer model. They had universal health care. They had civil servants that are working in their health system. And so it was a very different model in terms of the incentives. And so I think that's where things change. Not so much the mission. Everybody gets aligned around the mission. It's how are you actually going to implement those changes? And that's where the local healthcare context really, really matters. And it differs significantly. And you just do a lot of listening and a
So,
lot of learning.
so what's the most expensive misalignment you navigated in that work? Not in terms of money but in time, momentum, or organizational energy.
You know, I don't know if I'm going to get myself in trouble for saying this, but I would actually say technology has been the biggest barrier. And you're going to say, what does that mean? Why isn't technology enabling? Um, the situation that we have, and it's actually not just a US thing, but it's worse in the US, anywhere else, that we don't have a single electronic medical record system. And we have the inability to make a change in our electronic medical record system once is, I think, the fundamentally most expensive barrier we face and the one that's most challenging. So, as a result, what happens is every single healthcare system has to make a change on its own in their health system, in their instance. We do not capture structured data today about brain health anywhere. I was in a Duke Margolis meeting back in 2014. where we were looking at value-based care contracts and what would we need to be able to use value-based care contracts for a new Alzheimer's therapy. And the finding back in 2014 was can't do it because we don't have baseline data.
Mhm.
We actually don't collect brain health data
Wow.
in this country in a structured way. That was in 2014. It's now 2026. We still don't have baseline data. We still don't collect data that way. So you think about it, you're like, think about AI and technology, and this should be so easy. You would think it would be really easy. Let's just create structured data in our electronic medical record system just to capture the cognitive assessment. Let's just do it for one step. In the United States of America, it is a requirement in the annual wellness visit that every patient over the age of 65 has a legislative right to a cognitive assessment. Not done. It happens less than 10% of the time in this country. And even if it happens, it's not necessarily captured in a structured way where you can use that data. So to me, that is one of the most expensive problems we have because the first question you get is, what's the baseline? The first question is, what's the value in doing this? You can't measure it. If you can't measure it, you can't tell someone that they're doing it or not doing it. You can't keep score. You can't put a dashboard in place. You can't figure out where it's working and where it's not working.
Mhm.
And I don't know how expensive that would be to fix, but I can tell you it's probably the single biggest barrier that we face in making change quickly. So instead, we have to do it in every single hospital's instance, which is 90 to $100,000 a pop in every single time you try to make a change.
Wow.
So if I had a magic wand, I think that's what I would try to fix.
That's insightful. So you left you left Lilly after 30 years to build something of your own. What was that decision actually like? Was it clear? Was it, was it heavy? Was it muddled? What was that?
Yeah, it was heavy. It was a big decision. I used to work for a company. Of course, I live here in Indiana, right, which is where the headquarters are. People still say, "Oh, you work for the Lillies?" And it's like, nope, it's a public company. Doesn't isn't owned by the Lillies anymore. But that's an Indiana thing. It's a wonderful company, and I have so much appreciation and gratefulness for the blessing that was basically my first job out of college. And I laugh. This is one company where people work for it. You work for the company all your entire life, and then you die, and they bury you in the front lawn. I mean, really, I left after 28 years, and I was sometimes one of the more junior people in the room, which is crazy. But that's just what that company does, and the kind of loyalty. They actually just a couple weeks ago celebrated a 150-year anniversary. So it was a big decision. I mean, I would have told you I was one of those people that would have, been buried in the front lawn. Well, what happened is after having run 8 phase 3 studies, and seeing 3 molecules not get to patients, when I saw that donanemab was going to make it, so donanemab, which is now launched as Kisunla,
Mhm.
I had a choice at that point. Do I launch that drug? And I'd launched lots of drugs before. Or do I go do something to make sure that people who can benefit from these therapies can get them?
Mhm.
And one of the biggest things that I had learned in that time is that our health systems were not prepared for this aging population. People weren't getting diagnosed in a timely manner. They weren't getting diagnosed accurately. Nobody was having the conversations we needed to have about brain health. I saw this and how hard it was to recruit clinical trials, but as a commercial person, I knew this was going to face our molecules were going to face this when they launched. Not to mention, even people who aren't candidates for the molecules, they're the new drugs once they're available, they aren't getting the care and support they needed. And I had firsthand experience of this. My family went through this diagnostic journey and I had access to every thought leader on the planet, and it was still an almost crippling process.
Mhm.
And so I said, if I stayed at Lilly, I could have launched the drug. But the other thing that would have happened is all of the compliance regulations that are part of working for a pharmaceutical company would have come to bear on my work. This is not Lilly's fault. It is part of working in a highly regulated environment. but I would no longer have been able to, I couldn't have done what I'm doing with you right now,
Mm.
right? All of that would have been shut down because I worked within the company that owned the drug. By moving out and being able to be independent, I lost that regulatory um, boundaries that a company like Lilly or ASI or Biogen have to work within. And so that was really the decision. My kids were going to college, graduating. I was going to be an empty nester. I had a chance to, I said, okay, now we've got a drug. Now I got to go change the world. And there, it just was going to be easier to do it sitting outside of the company than sitting inside the company. And thankfully the company um, respected that decision. And so been a wonderful transition.
Fantastic. So most leaders who leave a major institution like Lilly after that long carry something with them that's hard to name. You know, it's an identity that was built inside that structure. So what did you have to let go of when you left?
Well, saying we. I still talk to Lily people and say we, and I'm like, oh, I don't mean we, I mean you. That's kind of hard.
Mm.
Um, there's a lot that I don't want to let go of, right? Lily put science first. They put patients first. There's so many good things that I don't want to let go of. I think one of the biggest things for me, I was just actually talking with um, some mentees earlier this week, and they were asking me a similar question. And I think one of the things that I had to come to terms with in a positive way when I left is that there was value in me. Before when I was at Lilly, and part of this is what Lilly does. They create this. They're really, really good at it. If you read any of the Harvard Business Case reviews and stuff, Lilly's really good at succession management, almost in a cult-like way. They say, you have vice president potential. We're going to give you these roles. We're going to do this. And all of a sudden, and you're following that guidance, you're following that career path, you're following that design in a very positive way, right? Very positive, very good. But then I would go and I'd be on this panel as the Lilly representative, or I'd be on that group on the committee on that as a Lilly representative, or that board as a Lilly representative. So I had kind of ingrained in me that my value was as the Lilly representative.
Mhm.
Um, so one of the things that I had to come to terms with, and this has been one of the most joyful parts of this transition, is that there was actually value in me. It wasn't because I had a Lilly title. It was what I brought to the table. It was my creativity, my knowledge, my experience, my, forethought, my strategic thinking, my kindness, that the value was in me. And that was really hard to let go of. And, I don't know if you call that imposter syndrome or what you do, but I had to really make a transition to be comfortable that I was the value, I was the asset. And it wasn't just because I had a title with the Lilly name
Right.
assigned to me.
Well, I mean, you've described yourself as an innovator, investor, and incubator. That's a different kind of leadership than running a function inside a large company. What's harder about it than you expected?
I mean, you got to hustle, right? I mean, when you're in business for yourself, you've got to hustle. I tell people, I don't have any PTO. I have as much TO as I want, but I don't have any PTO. I think I'm going to, just take my paycheck today. And I'm not saying that anybody actually does that. I mean, you work really, really hard. Whether you're, getting a paycheck from a company or whether you're, earning it through independent contracts. Um, One of the things I did, which I wish I had done sooner, is I started tracking my hours
Hmm.
because you had to, because you're going to now bill hours, right? And even for retainer contracts, you want to make sure you know how many hours you're working for a client. It was such a good experience because in the beginning, I'd look down, I'd be like, I worked 10 hours today and I billed two. What am I doing with my time?
Hmm.
And boy, I wish I had tracked my time. By the way, if someone from Lilly hears this, they're going to be really upset because I'm not telling Lilly executives to have people track their time. But it was so insightful. as to where you spend your time. And then, I'm an analytical person. So then I had a spreadsheet. So then I could go back and, on a monthly basis or at the end of a year, and I could do an evaluation. Did I spend my time in
Hmm.
the places that were the most valuable?
Right.
And that doesn't necessarily mean the ones that were paying me the most money, but where I wanted to spend my time. And that was a big transition and something that I wish I had done sooner because you're so much more intentional with how you spend your day.
Mhm.
Uh, and it doesn't take that much time to track your hours.
So what do you protect most fiercely as a leader right now? Not, not in terms of the work or the mission, but internally. What do you work hardest to keep intact?
Yeah. So I had three retirement rules because when I left Lilly, it was technically retirement. I took early retirement. I'd been there long enough and very thankful for a defined benefit pension. Um, I had three rules, and those are the things I protect. The first is no meetings before 9 a.m.
Hmm.
And I'm pretty good about that, unless I'm on the road or it's a call with Japan or Europe or something. And that's so that I can have my morning. If I'm going to be out there talking about brain health, I need to be doing it. So that's how I can go to the gym in the morning. It's how I get my head on straight. A series of ththings that I do for myself in the morning. I'm very protective of that time. The second thing is I didn't want any direct reports. I and that sounds funny because I loved my leadership roles at Lilly, but I can still do all the things I love. I can still mentor, I can still coach, but I don't have responsibility for others. And I do feel responsible for the teams that I help and I work with, but I'm not doing that day-to-day performance management, things like that. I get to do all the fun stuff of leading without the less fun stuff, the HR part. And then the third is I didn't want to work for just one organization. And that's where the fractional work as part of this consulting came. And the reason for that is I think I can create more value when I have a broader vantage point of all the different things going on. It also allows me to flex and be where I'm most needed. So rather than, trying to find a client and milk more out of that client
Mhm.
when they don't really need me, I can pivot and not spend as much time with that client at that point because this client over here is really in a point of time where I can be helpful. And so when I think about what that means and what motivates me, it's I'm pre I'm pre for me the intrinsic value I get is being where I'm valued and where I can create value. And so those are the things I'm really protecting. My time, my
Yeah.
mornings, my ability to create value,
Mhm.
and that I'm spending my time on the human side of the things that are going to once again be best for whether that be mentees or teammates. I'm not sure if that gets to the answer of your question so
Yeah,
much,
no,
but
it
those were my
doesn't.
three rules, and I'm sticking
Yeah,
to them pretty well.
I love that. So, looking back across the arc, 30 years at Lilly, Davos, PB Farrell, USC, the boards, the investing, what decision would you most want to revisit? Not to change it, just to understand it better.
What would I think intentionality. Um, and I kind of alluded to this earlier. There's nothing I would change necessarily from my career at Lilly, looking back. But I can tell you I wasn't incredibly intentional through my own lens of what did I want. I really followed the model. Someone said, you know, we need someone over here. You should consider doing this. I said, okay, we think you should go here. It would be helpful. This is a skill set you need in order to make it to the next level. Go take this role for development. And so I really followed this succession planning that is kind of done for you at Lilly, right? I mean, once again, it's a process that they run. And I don't think I really stopped and said, what do I want? Once again, it's maybe a little bit of an academic exercise because I can't tell you I'd look back at any of those experiences and wish I hadn't had them or made necessarily a change. But I didn't realize until I got to this decision where I was coming up on my 80 points and I could take a defined benefit early retirement, where I realized it was my choice and I got to be intentional. And I read a book called Roar by Michael Clinton.
Hmm.
I decided to go back and get a PhD. It was COVID. I wasn't traveling. And so, like I said, some people got a pandemic puppy. I got a pandemic PhD. And I just made some choices that were totally mine in that moment as I prepared for this chapter. And I was really super intentional about it. And I can't tell you that I had done that up until that point. Turning 50, well, we were all doing it, right? Turning 50, COVID, introspection, reading this book, my defined benefit points, they all came up. And I really took this time to be super intentional. And I realized that I hadn't done it really
Hmm.
previously. I wish I had. Once again, not because I think I'd make any different decisions, but I think I maybe would have been I would have learned more about myself in the process if I had done that.
So you've operated at sort of the intersection of science, policy, investment, and advocacy kind of simultaneously. So when those pull in different directions, and I'm assuming they must, how do you decide which signal to trust?
So you mentioned that I have this, doctorate degree from IU and an MBA from Stanford. What you didn't mention is I actually have a liberal arts undergraduate degree from a small school here in Indiana called DePaul University. And this is my advocacy for liberal arts because Terry, it happens all the time. Whether it was a cross-functional team at Lilly where you had regulatory and medical and marketing and sales and operations all had different opinions about what you should do, or now where I'm sitting needing to make a decision and we have, to your point, policy, government, nonprofit, industry kind of with different opinions. You've got to figure out an orthogonal solution where it's not zero sum. And that, I think, is the benefit of that liberal arts education because you're not looking at the world through one discipline. You're basically, I mean, how many times, I had a philosophy class and a science class and a math class. And we were constantly studying different disciplines and looking at the world through different disciplines. And of course, as you get further through your education, you're starting to mix those. And so what you have to do is you have to sit down and say, this group says I want this group says I want this, and they look diametrically opposed. And
Mhm.
you've got to look at that and say, what's the path where neither of those groups felt like they had to compromise?
Right.
And there's almost always a way to do that. But if you come in with just one discipline or one lens and you're anchored in one, then it's a zero sum game. Somebody wins, somebody loses. When really what you have to do is say, how do I find an orthogonal? How do you find a solution that nobody's thought of yet, where everyone goes, I didn't have to compromise. I won. And usually that's mission aligned. That helps quite a bit. I'm not negotiating contracts necessarily where it is really more zero sum. But I have a huge advocate for a liberal arts education because of that.
That's brilliant. So if you could go back and give yourself one piece of advice, at the moment you decided to leave Lilly, not about the work or the strategy, but how to lead through what was coming, what would it be?
Give yourself some grace. It's a big change. Um, I mean, it's everything from, like I mentioned, tracking my hours, figuring out contracts and billing and, all those systems. I mean, I went from a PC to a Mac. I mean, it was like 90 days of hell trying to just figure out how to use a Mac. And I mean, I remember being on the phone with Apple Business going, I'm bringing this thing back to you if you can't figure out how to get Outlook working. And so just every single thing was new and how you run your day. How do you negotiate with a client? How do you say no to someone who wants you to be a consultant and it's not a good fit? And yeah, there's money attached to it, but inside this isn't a good fit for me.
Right.
And so, just giving yourself a lot of grace of how much learning is at every single step. And I was really lucky. I've got amazing classmates from Stanford, and I phone to friend. I was constantly phoning friends to say, how do I do this? Have you dealt with this before? And those were all like really, really safe places to ask those questions. But just ask questions, phone friends, give yourself some grace, because there's a lot of change. It was a lot of change.
So here's your last question.
Uh-oh.
It's kind of the one I ask every guest. What's a question you think leaders in your position almost never get asked, that you wish someone would ask?
This is a problem. You didn't give me any pre-questions, and now I know why you did, because you wanted to put me on the spot. Um, so here's one of my favorite questions, that I wish that I used to ask, and I wish more leaders asked. And I think we can even broaden it. But I used to ask, as part of my performance review, how many days of vacation do you have left, and how are you going to use them?
Hmm.
And I would put in a performance management plan that I wanted people to tell me how they were using that vacation. And it
Wow.
I wanted to be them to be accountable to me that they were using those days. At Lilly, if you didn't use your vacation, then it went away. It didn't roll over to the next year. You weren't banking anything. And, I would broaden that out to say, it's not just about vacation. It's about how are you investing in yourself? And that could be everything from relaxing and recharging, because you will be a better teammate for me if you do that, to what other skills are you creating? Like, once again, I come back to this liberal arts thing. I come back to brain health. We know that our brains are healthier when we are cross training, just like an athlete. What skills are you out there doing? What do you love? Is it mountain climbing? Is it music? Is it, being with nature? Is it bird watching? Is it writing a book? I mean, the chemists were all brewing beer. I don't care what it is. But tell me what it is that you love to do. What are you doing? And I want to be an accountability partner for you, that you're doing that. Because I know that, I mean, there's so much data, Terry, out there. There's so much data about why a 4-day work week is more productive than a 5-day work week. But most leaders don't look at it that way. They're counting hours, right? Like I just said, track your hours. Um, but I wish more leaders invested in the brain health of their employees. They would get better teammates. And in return, they would take better care of their own brain health. Because I now know that over 40% of dementias are preventable with some changes in lifestyle. And one of the most important ones is sleep. And I think of the years and years of executives wearing I only need 4 hours or 5 hours of sleep. I'm good on 5 hours of sleep as like a badge of honor. I spent it overnight. How many days of travel, all those kinds of things. And boy, were they doing damage to their own brains and doing damage to their team watching that. And so I wish we were more intentional
Hmm.
about firing some other synapses and holding our teammates accountable to taking care of themselves. They will deliver better for the company if we do that.
Brilliant. So, Phyllis, this has been exactly the kind of conversation in the inquiry was built for. And so,
Oh, good. I'm
yeah,
glad.
thank you for being willing to sit inside some of these questions with me. And I hope you don't feel like you were ambushed or anything like that.
No, my
Uh,
pleasure.
but it's been a real pleasure, and I greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Terry.
And so, for the audience out there, thank you as well for participating. In the meantime, stay in the inquiry.